Hello and welcome to episode 137 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stanislav, how are you, my friend? How's everything going for my good buddy, Stanislav?
It's great. It's a hot one over here, I'll tell you that.
It really is.
I just ordered 2 air filters for my entire house, 2 air cleaners, because we have you know what the forecast is? It's like these 3 wavy lines. That's all what the forecast is, 3 wavy lines of smoke. I didn't know that was a forecast, smoke.
Is it because of the Dixie fires?
It's because like these California fires, and they're just, waving all over the nation because our country is burning. Paul, I hope everyone's good out there.
Right. If any of our listeners are in California and are impacted by the Dixie fires, we hope you're okay. Also with us, the Godfather, Dave Harbarger. What did you order today?
Ordered my children around a lot.
Sweet.
Ordered some new car seats. Working on cost to close estimate sheets. I got all kinds of things going on over here with that, but nobody cares. It's time for us to have a great top tier patron request episode, right, Stan?
Oh yeah, it's that time again. Patron request episode. It's our version of a dono deck where our biggest supporters can work with us to generate an episode topic every 6 months or so. And this week, Sean D wanted us to cover the Stoneblade decks in Modern that are in the format right now. Try to figure out how they try to win, how these decks are actually different, and how well are they even positioned in today's metagame.
And do they all even have blades in them? Do they? We'll see.
Stone equipment. It's not quite as good.
They have stones.
Stone equipment.
Stone living weapons.
And this week, we're going to revisit one of the most beloved, debated, and powerful cards in Modern, Stoneforge Mystic. We're also going to revisit Stoneforge's history in Modern, then deep dive into 3 different Blade-style decks that have been showing up in the format in leagues and tournaments lately. So thanks again, Sean D, for your generous support, your loyal patronage, and really thanks to everyone who makes the show possible. Also, as an aperitif, we're going to go through a couple of Modern challenges from this weekend and also do what everybody loves, housekeeping.
Now, this housekeeping. This is a banger housekeeping.
If you usually skip housekeeping, don't skip this housekeeping. We have a lot of houses to keep.
We have a lot of things to tell you right now, everybody.
Okay, I'll go first. I have an important announcement. Okay. So it's good news and bad news. The bad news is I have to take 2 to 3 weeks off from the dive down.
Stan, please don't come back in 3 weeks. Okay, we're going to talk about this.
Your time,
Stan is going to take some time off from the dive down, not a very long time, but please take more than 3 weeks. Now tell him why.
Undetermined amount of time. The good news is it's because my wife and I are having a baby.
Yeah.
My man, my lady.
We're just finding out. Not really.
Yeah, I told my co-host right before we recorded.
Yeah, I'm still in shock.
Yeah. So
jaw agape.
We've been pregnant since November. We're giving birth this week, and we could not be more excited. I'm going on paternity leave from work and from my hobby, which is the dive down. I will not be taking 12 weeks off of the dive down, which is what my job gave me.
But that's great.
I know.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So that's going to happen. You're not going to hear from me for a little while with one caveat. Next week, we have a bonus episode that's recorded. It's in the bag. It's me and a beloved Modern deck builder, player, person you're going to want to hear from. So you will hear me next week, but no Shane or Dave in the bonus. And we're not even going to have an episode next week. Everyone needs a week off.
Yeah, I'm going to be backpacking. Didn't make sense to try to prepare and schedule around that. Dave
is living an extremely unstable lifestyle still right now. That will be resolved in a couple of weeks, but it just seemed like a good time for us to take a week off on the 15th here.
Then the week after that, because Stan, of course, will still be on paternity leave, Dave is finalizing his moving stuff. I will be doing, almost certainly, an episode with 2 special guests. You will know who they are, and it's going to be a fun one, I think. So it'll be probably the first crossover ep. That's all I'm going to say. And then we'll take it from there. But prepare for something fun in 2 weeks and nothing next week.
Well, you'll have something next week. There will be dive down content, but it will be one of our free bonus episodes.
Oh, and we're going to charge accordingly.
Yeah, and just everybody understands, this episode is probably going to come out on Wednesday the 11th, the one that we're talking about right now. The one that there will be no regular episode will be Wednesday the 18th. And then Wednesday the 25th is the one that Stan and I will not be on, but Shane will be on with guests. And then we'll see where it goes from there.
Right, because from there, it's Wednesday, August 25th, which we all know is like everyone's favorite day to play Magic. Beyond that, it's Wednesday, September 1st, which is an average day. But before we go through all the Wednesdays left in the year, let's talk about some new patrons who joined the Dive Down Nation.
Yeah, my favorite part of the whole episode.
Big thanks to Dylan F., Alex L., Josh, and Andrew C. for joining the Dive Down Nation. Also, shout out to Cloudy and John S. for going up a tier in their patronage.
Right on.
And some gratuity to a few new reviews we received via Apple, NK Malakal, Z Ryle. I wonder who that could be.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Zach Ryle.
Might be.
Mana Symbol.
Oh, Mana Symbol.
Awesome.
And Sam E92.
Yeah, thanks for all the reviews. We appreciate it. We read every one.
Good reviews. We love good reviews. Well-written and well-researched reviews.
I'm still doing research.
Still doing research.
On them. Look, hey, I also want to apologize right now to anybody watching the live stream. And I'm in a room with an unruly puppy. And if there's noise this episode, I'm really sorry about that. I already get up once to take something he wasn't supposed to eat out of his mouth. We'll see how it goes.
Classic.
So, as Stan mentioned, we have some new patrons, some increased tier patrons. We love seeing all these new faces in the nation. The transition to Discord seems like it's going really well. We've got citizens streaming Arena and Magic Online in our streaming channels. That's been a lot of fun. It's really cool to be able to just click share screen and just jump in a room with people, giving you feedback and just having fun watching people play Magic. It's going well. I think the transition was successful. Thanks again to Lou and the rest of the IT team for making that so easy and so smooth. And we really appreciate all the new patrons and people going up a tier. And if you want to join the Dive Down Nation, experience what I think is the best place to talk about Magic online, go to patreon.com/thedivedown. As little as $1 a week gets you access to the definitively discreet Dive Down Discord, and also going up from there gets you some sweet swag. People have been posting their photos of it arriving. Makes me really happy to see the envelopes getting to people. So thanks again.
Yeah, and if you'd like to support the Dive Down while playing Magic online specifically, check out manatraders.com, where we rented all the decks that we played this week for our deck dive on Stoneforge Mystic, as we mentioned. If you want to check them out, it's manatraders.com. And if you sign up using the promo code TheDiveDown2021, you will get 15% off of your first 2 months of Magic rental cards. manatraders.com.
All right, Shane, don't go too far because I believe you are on the news desk this week.
It's a big Shane episode this week.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to be talking so much.
We have some BSC on today's show.
Man, Modern Challenges, how do I love thee quite a bit, because they offer an ongoing look into the impressively dynamic post-Modern Horizons 2 metagame. Thanks again to the ever-present Bamzing for the work in getting us these top 8 lists and top 32 breakdowns, often before WotC even gives us the data through crowdsourcing top 8s, like as soon as the challenge is done. I don't know really how they do it. They must just have all the Twitter connections. So let's talk about Saturday. I think Saturday's challenge is really interesting because it showed us again that Modern is both diverse and I guess diverse both in power and in strategies. Like, no deck seems to have the ability to stay on top of the meta permanently, it seems like, right? Like last weekend, the 4 and 5 color elementals decks looked like they were kind of going over the top of everybody else. There was 3 copies and 1 top 8 alone. But this Saturday, single copy of elementals in the top 32. And in fact, the top 32 had 25 different decks.
No, really? That is surprising.
Yeah, I mean, 25 different decks with a little bit of overlap in strategy. Well, the only decks that showed up more than once were Temur Footfalls, had 3. Hammer and Eldrazi Tron had 2. And I guess if you like I said, if you want to get really sticky about it. There's a 4-color footfalls in there. There's a red-white hammer, but there's a lot of one-ofs of new and old strategies. Like we have things like Dredge and Is It Murktide and Mardu, Dragon's Rage Channeler, 4-color Shadow, Yawgmoth, 4-color Control, Panza, Amulet Titan, Food Shells, Glimpse of Tomorrow, all the stuff that you love to see, or maybe don't love to see. I also want to make a quick note that one of the list of the most played cards on Goldfish for this tournament, Endurance, was number 3.
Wow.
34 copies played in the top 32 alone, more than everything except for Lightning Bolt and Mishra's Bauble. So our new Tier 0 elemental creature, Endurance, says, hello, I am here.
So what you're saying is 2 months ago, the number 1 played creature in Modern was Monastery Swiftspear, and now it's a pitch card that removes your opponent's graveyard. Okay.
It can remove your graveyard.
Oh, yeah, if you want, sure.
And blocks Dragon's Rage Channeler nicely.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about this top 8. We had Starfall on Mono White Hammer. The only weird inclusion here or change at all was that they ran 23 lands, which is a dedication to consistency and mana base over the 22 or usually even 21 that you more often see. I think that's smart. It's a deck that you want to hit your land. You want to have your land access to land, and Urza's Saga pops and goes away and is no longer land. So that's a strong mana base there. 23 lands. Second place, Tarmogoyf 1234 on Is It Murktide, stock. Jade Cavey on Temur Footfalls, basically stock.
So there is some. There is a little bit of iteration in this Temur deck.
Yeah, give me some iteration, Stan.
This, I think, was first pioneered by Doomwake, and they started playing Prismari Command and main deck Fury instead of Cryptic Command, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the idea is you have Prismari Command, which is a card that you can pitch to your Furies or to your Forces of Negation. And then Fury gives you some additional removal that can also be a threat if you want to be crazy and side out all of your Crashing Footfalls and your Cascade cards, which we do not condone.
Perfect.
So yeah, just wanted to call that out. Prismari Command seems interesting.
Prismari Command turning out to be way better than we thought it was going to be, right? Like I dismissed it as a bad Kolaghan's command at one point in time, but it turns out that red-blue is just super good in lots of different ways in Modern, and I'm sure the Is It Charm mode comes in handy occasionally, so maybe it is good.
It's also nice just to have multicolor pitch, right? Like it pitches to Fury, it pitches to this deck's still running Subtlety sometimes, or no, Stan?
This one has 1 in the board.
Yeah. Word.
I think it's also nice to have an on-plan main deck answer that can occasionally tag Chalice or EE, which people are bringing in, or EE on 0 or Chalice on 0 are both pretty bad against or pretty good and strong against your Rhinos.
All right, up next, 4th place, Klein 7, Little 7 on Dredge. Yes, Dredge again with the Burning Inquiry variant that we've seen pop up before. So yeah, play Dredge. Just do it. Who cares about Endurance? Not me. I've got Burning Inquiry. 5th place, Via Bleach on Glimpse of Tomorrow combo. I feel like this deck is probably underrated. It's a good deck. I mean, I'm sure there's certain pieces of hate that can stop what it's trying to do, but it can get online really quickly and mess with people's game plans and does some good stuff. I think people are iterating on this and learning the right way to build it, the right cards to include. I think it's staying around. Yeah,
the payoffs for Glimpse of Tomorrow have changed up a little bit. Now it's playing Chancellor of the Forge, Goblin Dark Dwellers, Omnath, even Tyler's Provisioner to help create permanents that you then flip with your Glimpse.
Yeah, Chancellor of the Forge, that's the card that gives you a token if you reveal it pregame, right? That's like a pregame action.
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
So that gives you another piece of cardboard to mess with Glimpse of Tomorrow.
For sure. And then it becomes a 5/5. Though
yeah, sounds good to me.
The early versions of this deck, all the payoffs were Eldrazi. So now we're not playing Eldrazi anymore. Now we're just playing value creatures and Omnaths and Dark Dwellers.
All right. Next up, 6th place, Uriel on Mardu Luris. I don't know what it is about this deck. It just speaks to me.
It's that I 5-0'd with something close to this.
Yeah. I mean, I know that this is like a grindy, value deck, getting every piece of value you can out of every card, and I know I won't be good at that, and I know that I'm going to go to time at the LGS, but I want to play this deck.
I think this deck's good. I think this is a position evolution of the red-black deck because it's able to pack better main deck Graveyard Hate and Kaya's Guile, and then main deck.
Three guys go.
Yeah, people are liking it, and then also it gets to play with Prismatic Ending to get rid of those really problematic things that red-black can't deal with otherwise. So I think I think this is a good version of what was essentially red-black Channeler before.
Dave, what do you think about no Unholy Heat in the 75?
That's surprising to me, but maybe it's a bit of a meta play right now, because if they're not trying to kill Titan, then I guess that it's kind of okay. I was looking at this list just now trying to figure out what card was missing, and yeah, that's what you've got. Kaya's Guile instead of Unholy Heat, basically.
Yeah, loading up on, it's like 3K Com, 3 Kaya's Guile. It's pretty in on the more expensive modal spells, which is the kind of thing that scares me, because I'm like, how do I get value out of these very expensive spells? But they do get the job done. 7th place, MJ0202 on Temur Footfalls. 8th place, Kieran on Jund Food, which I don't think I've seen this exact build yet, but it is essentially what appears to be a blend of, surprisingly, by the name, Jund and Asmo food decks. It's got 4 Ragavan, 4 Tarmogoyf, getting you that early aggression. Bolt is Bolt. But it also has 3 Wrenn and 6 and 2 Grist, which can do what those cards do. They get the ongoing value. They make you hit your lands. They provide removal options, both in Wrenn and 6 with the minus, and Grist with the minus, hitting a creature that you can get back from the graveyard, all that kind of stuff. And then the Asmo package, of course, just stops all those opposing creature strategies cold. So I kind of love the look of this deck. I don't know how it plays out, but sweet. Cool evolution, cool variant.
Yeah, don't forget that this deck has 4 Urza's Saga in it as well, so it's still an Urza's Saga deck in there with the Jundiness. And also, the only targets for the search on Urza's Saga are Shadow Spear and Underworld Cookbook. That's it.
Yeah.
Main deck,
Sounds like you're making constructs.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what you're doing. Shadow Spear's not bad on a construct. Give it some trample.
Oh yeah, that's the best thing. I love it. So we got 7 different decks with what I would call 7 different strategies. I think that's pretty cool.
Well, aren't there 2 Cascade decks? Oh, right. And you said 7.
Yeah, not 8, Stan. Not 8. Thoughts on Saturday, y'all? Like, does this give you hope? Does this make you anxious about anything? Does it make you anxious to play something that's weak to endurance?
I'm anxious, but not because of Magic.
If you skipped Housekeeping, go back and listen to why Stan's anxious. I don't know. I mean, it looks fine to me. It looks like the metagame that we've been seeing lately. You got your Hammer, you got your DRC deck, you got your Cascade decks. So there's nothing too surprising here, but these are good decks, and I think it's still like a fun looking metagame.
So as is now typical, our Sunday recording means we're relying on our secret breakdown informant Bamsing for this crowdsourced top 8, and we don't have the top 32 to look at all. But let's go through this top 8.
We don't even have deck lists, right?
No, we don't have deck lists.
We just know
either,
archetypes.
unfortunately. Which is kind of sad, because I really want to see what some of these decks are doing. First place, Living End. Volkswagen brought that. Second place, Suicidal Eidolon on Mono Green Tron. Third place, Tunico Berno on Hammer. 4th place, Sodek with Living End. 5th place, Alejandro MF Dez on Temur Footfalls. This is also a mix of Magic Online names and Twitter handles, because Bamsing always shouts people out on their Twitter handle. So bear with me. So that was Temur Footfalls, 5th place. 6th place, Orzhov Grief. CEL was on that. We don't know if that's a Blade style deck, if that's just kind of a disruptive mid-range deck. We'll find out soon. 7th place, Audio 336 on Mono Green Tron. And 8th place, Antodello on Mono Green Tron.
Oh, whoa. Okay.
Hold on, Shane. I think you misread something, because you just listed off 3 Mono Green Tron decks.
Did I copy and paste something incorrectly?
Did you copy and paste a challenge result from 2018, perhaps?
Yeah, so what is this? We've got 3 Green Tron in the top 8 alone, unless Bamsing is lying to me. I really wish we had deck lists, because I am very curious what tech they brought in here, if any, if it's just the Stone normal version from the past 3 years, if it's bringing in some new tech. We'll find out later on tonight or tomorrow, I hope.
I can tell you, I'm pretty sure that I played against a mono green Tron deck the other night that had Urza Saga in it. I definitely played. So I did a league the other night, and I played against Green Tron, Blue Tron, and Eldrazi Tron within the constraints of that league, and Titan. So I played against 4 big mana decks.
Oh my gosh.
Ask me more about that later. But the
Hope you were running Blood Moon.
I was playing Black White, so no. But anyway, I don't know. It seems like people have been thinking that these Tron decks are popular. I know Eldrazi Tron has been getting kind of popular because of Chalice. So I'm not too surprised that there's a bunch of it around. But, the Sunday challengers are sometimes weird.
Yeah.
I actually think one of the things that helps Tron, and this is super narrow, but the Karn package being able to grab Sundering Titan, or if they're even playing Sundering Titan main, I feel like Sundering Titan in particular is great right now. And if you notice, not a lot of the decks that we've been talking about in the top 8s today are running main deck Blood Moons. Cascade is the only one that occasionally has sideboard Blood Moons. So I wonder if Tron is able to just dodge land hate in general, and then also punish a ton of these greedy other color-heavy decks using Sundering Titans. I know that's just something that I had to deal with in my league against Tron too.
It just blows my mind though, in a world of prismatic endings and Force of Vigors, killing off expedition maps, killing off chromatic spheres and stars, but that's what Tron really needs to get its early game combo going. Maybe it just dodged it, maybe it just is shoring up that matchup in other ways. Some days Tron just wins.
I also think we were just talking about how Endurance was the second most played creature. Makes me think that tons and tons of people are loading up on Graveyard Hate, and maybe they're shaving, or like Stan said, not playing decks that have reasonable play against Tron and then also have land hate like Blood Moon. So there might be just a tilting of the metagame going on a little bit there.
Yeah, Endurance is a card that Tron just does not care about. Okay, it's a 3/4 reach.
Yeah, you did it. One thing that we saw last week, I think, when that green Tron deck that showed up, it had a few Warping Whales main, and I'm wondering if that's still sticking around, because Warping Whale is a 1 and a colorless instant, lets you choose one. It's like a modal spell that you can exile a target creature with power or toughness 1 or less. So that tags a lot of things like Dragon's Rage Channeler before it's delirious. It can get a monkey. And also, another mode is counter target sorcery spell, which can take care of a lot of the Cascade shenanigans that are going around, because most of those are sorceries. And then the third mode is, make a Eldrazi Scion that can ramp you, but that's probably not as frequently used, I imagine.
I definitely had this card brought in against me in the Tron matchups that I was playing, and they were taking things like my Stoneforge Mystic, they were taking my Ingenious Smith, they were killing all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
Esper Sentinel was a big target for it too, but
of course. So we had 3 green Trons and then 3 Cascade strategies, like I just mentioned, 2 copies of Living End and a Temur Footfalls in the mix on the top 8. So after that, pretty interesting and diverse top 8 for Saturday. Sunday is a bit more worrying, perhaps, but it's just one event in a series of events, and I'm curious to see how people respond to this. If Green Tron shows up 3 in a top 8, people are definitely going to pay attention and react to that.
Shane, a few days ago, you asked me if I think that Temur Footfalls is actually a good deck.
Yeah.
And I said yes. Where did that question come from? And I'm curious to hear what you think of it, because it has been this pretty consistent mainstay in all these top 8s we're talking about. Are you having doubts about the power level of Footfalls?
Well, it's just as the critical mass of all of these Cascade strategies continues to exist in the meta, and people are bringing in things like Void Mirrors. Chalice is still ever present in all sorts of decks. It's just surprising to me that these decks continue to have the ability to fight through the hate cards as they keep showing up in people's sideboards and sometimes even main decks. And it's just one of those things where it's the efficiency of the format is so strong early that I'm consistently surprised that Temur Cascade doesn't feel like it's on the back foot. But I do know that gets made up for pretty quickly when you're casting 8/8 power and toughness of rhinos out there.
Right. Cool.
Yeah, I was hoping for some cool decks Inc. fodder, but the top 32 of Saturday was basically all established archetypes, and even going back into the prelims of the last week wasn't that interesting. There was a spicy return of Bogles in one of those, but honestly, nothing weird, nothing cool. I mean, it's cool that there's so many decks, but no one's bringing anything super spicy lately.
All right, well, thanks for putting together and doing the work on top of Bamzing's work to put together a little breakdown for everybody. 2 events. It's another weekend of Modern where it feels like, we're still playing in Modern Horizon 2's world, but it's not so bad there, I think.
Yeah, what I'm happy about is the churn, is the cycling at what's winning, the cycling of what's at the top, the fact that decks do not maintain dominance week over week. I mean, we do, of course, see Housekeeping showing up, but it's not like it's 7 out of the top 32. We're still seeing Is It Murktide show up, but it's like a 1 of or a 2 of. There's all these decks that have a place in the format and can win, any given weekend type stuff, but that's what makes me happy, is that the balance of power and the ability for decks to fight each other seems like it's there.
Nice. All right, well, next up, we're going to hop over to our top tier patron suggested episode for Sean D, where we're going to revisit Stoneforge Mystic in Modern in some decks this week, as Shane talked about, but we're going to talk about a bunch of the different shells that it appears in. Stay with us.
Okay, and we're back. And as we mentioned in the intro to this episode, this week's episode is a patron request from one of our top tier citizens of the nation, Sean D. Thanks again, Sean, for the ongoing support. Thanks again to all of our awesome citizens of the Dive Down Nation. It's been nearly 2 years with Stoneforge Mystic in the format.
I can't believe that. It's so surprising. 2 years.
It seems both longer and shorter.
We've been doing this show for more than 2 years. That's amazing.
Oh my God. Dave, over 2.5 years.
Oh, goodness. Dude. Okay.
So we thought, not only was it a great episode idea that Sean seems like they have a lot of passion for the Stoneblade archetypes. It also made sense to celebrate her anniversary with this request ep. So what Sean wanted us to do was look at the Stoneblade decks in Modern. And in my opinion, that necessitates, my friends, looking back on Stoneforge Mystic's past in Modern and her journey to her current status in the format. And if you're a true dive down head, you might remember our episode focused on Stoneforge around the time of her unbanning in episode 39, which, as I mentioned, was nearly 2 years ago at this point. A lot has changed since then, and has Stoneforge's place in the meta game. So let's begin by briefly revisiting her path into and through the Modern format.
Well, wait, I have a question before we do this.
Please.
Which one of us has the most experience playing Stoneforge Mystic, do we think?
Probably Stan.
Definitely Stan.
Probably Stan.
I would bet on Stan.
Stan, bottom line, before we
always
get into...
bet on Stan.
Exactly, always bet on Stan. Before we get into this history, Stan.
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed having Stoneforge Mystic as an option to play over the last couple of years? Just, is it a fun card for you?
100%. There was that one time where I was like, Stoneforge, one of my favorite cards in Modern, and you guys were like, what? Since when? Yeah. And I was like, literally since it was unbanned. It's Goyf.
It's Goyf. What?
That's my favorite thing to say about 2-drop creatures. It's Goyf.
It's Goyf. It's part of the 2-drop cycle. Do you know the 2-drop cycle story?
No.
The mystical, potentially never finished cycle of a generic and a colored mana cards that are all supposed to be awesome. There's Snapcaster Mage, Tarmogoyf, Stoneforge Mystic, Young Pyromancer, and Bob, I think is what generally people say the 5 cards are. But everybody's always got a thought on what the other ones are. You know what I mean? Where they're like, oh, I think that the red one is not Young Pyromancer, it's really this. Or I think the white one is not Stoneforge Mystic, it's really this. It's one of those recurring things. Anyway, let's get into that history.
It's really Leonin Arbiter.
Yeah, it's Leonin Arbiter.
All right. So Stoneforge was printed in Worldwake in 2010 and quickly found herself into a standard strategy called Caw-Blade that was so powerful that she was banned out of the format. And at the time, that was kind of novel, unlike today, where it's kind of expected.
That was one of the first bannings in 6 or 7 years at the time that happened, believe it or not. And the funniest thing about that, which you told the story a couple times, is that there was a pre-release deck that had Stoneforge Mystic in it. And if you did not alter the pre-release deck after the banning, you could play Stoneforge Mystic, but only if you just used the event deck.
Yeah, they didn't want people to feel like they paid something for nothing.
Right. Pretty funny.
All right, so, I mean, I imagine you know what Stoneforge Mystic does. I can't imagine you don't, but it is a Stoneforge Mystic episode. 1 and a white, creature, core artificer, 1/2. When she ETBs, you can search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. 1 and a white, tap. You may put an equipment card from your hand onto the battlefield. So Modern was created around the time of Stoneforge's dominance in mid-2011, and WotC was so hesitant to have the strategy infiltrate their new format that they just pre-banned Stoneforge Mystic entirely with the rest of the pre-banned cards. And so for 8 years, she just sat on the shelf biding her time. People had plenty of discussions about whether or not she was safe to unban as the Modern kept going. She was still there. Every time there was an unban scheduled, her price would shoot up. She wouldn't get unbanned and would go back down, repeat, until one time everybody won. Stoneforge was unbanned on August 26th, 2019. People got their wish. Its unbanning was announced at the same time Looting and Hogak were simultaneously banned. The argument at the time from WotC is that enough time had passed in Modern where Stoneforge could be at an appropriate power level. So it took 8 years for Wizards to think that Stoneforge was now at the Modern's power level for what the rest of the format was doing.
So that means all you twin heads that Twin's going to be unbanned in 3 years by the same clock. Just keep that in
Has
mind.
Twin been banned 5 years?
It's been banned since 2016. Yeah.
Oh my god. Oh man.
Also, I'm making a joke, but
wow. I mean, we'll see. And they were also clearly, or fairly clearly, wanting to bring the format back to the battlefield, or at least in a fair way, by when they get rid of Looting, get rid of Hogak, take the graveyard strategies out of the equation, and maybe try to play a little bit more fair. And Stoneforge had previously excelled in a fair strategy, right? And it made sense to give players this formerly powerful tool to make those styles of decks have a reason to exist, give them something to really center their builds on. And of course, people flocked to these decks featuring Stoneforge Mystic. I remember the early deck dumps with Stoneforge unbanned had dozens of decks with Stoneforge in it, right? I remember in our early Stoneforge episode that I referenced a little bit ago, we tested 5 different decks alone in that episode. There was Azorius Control with her controlling the battlefield. There was Azorius Taxes. There was a Bant Stone Flash style deck. There was that Selesnya Eldrazi deck featuring Stoneforge. There was a Jeskai Tempo Blade strategy that's kind of existed in some way, shape, or form since then. I'd also love to see us try to cover 5 different decks in an episode right now. It would be 3 hours long.
Well, we did 100 decks in 2.5.
Well, we can't do it without the bell. And the bell is in a box somewhere in storage right now, so we can't even try.
And so you can kind of see what Stoneforge did after that by looking at her price history. From this early peak of $80, over the next 5 months, she has trickled straight back down into $40. Where she stayed, she even dropped a little bit after she got reprinted in Double Masters. And I want to get your perspective on this, guys, but the issue with Stoneforge, I think, ultimately, was that she was very fair in a modern format that got increasingly more powerful, both fairly and unfairly, around her, and the swords that came along for the ride with her. Modern was dominated by things like Uro Piles and Heliod Combo and Death Shadow, and of course, Burn was always there, threatening to remove Stoneforge as soon as she was cast. It's just challenging to see, to me at least, I guess, how Stoneforge was offering the strength needed to succeed in Modern after she was unbanned. Am I remembering this incorrectly? Do you think she was better than I'm giving her credit for?
I never felt like Stoneforge was a tier 1 in power level deck for very extended periods of time. Obviously she won. She was in winning Modern decks and would top 8 not infrequently, but it would come in these ebbs and flows. Toward the beginning, I think people were really jazzed to play her, that so many good players were playing her, that inevitably she appeared in winning deck lists. But nowadays, it kind of almost feels like a sweet treat when we see Stoneforge in a winning deck.
It's how'd you do it?
Yeah.
but more on that later.
Well, I mean, wait. So it's in Hammer, so it's in a winning deck all the time right now. It's not quite the same thing.
I want to talk about how Stoneforge is being used in Modern towards the end of the episode. But what about her as in what she was ostensibly good at, being in a Blade deck?
I mean, those decks were reasonably popular back I would say, I mean, honestly, just before the pandemic, right? Like I remember seeing a good amount of kind of blue-white Stoneforge decks floating around towards the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. But like Stan said, they were never like dominant. And it was always clear that they were fair. I mean, the one thing that was interesting about the should we unban it, should we not unban it discussion is that old chestnut that comes back where people say, well, either it's going to be bad or it's going to be way too good. And, and
some of the best players in the world said that.
Yeah. And I kind of like, at the time, I felt like that was kind of logical. But now you look at Stoneforge Mystic and you just go, this card is just fine. And some people love it. And that's cool for them.
I wonder if it's always a fair card because it goes into just control decks more often than not. Hammer almost feels like an exception. And I think it says a lot that it doesn't have that Stoneforge namesake like so many other Blade decks do. Because nowadays, more often than not, with the exception of Hammer, Stoneforge is just a threat that you put into your control deck as a way to like actually finish that doesn't rely on Celestial Colonnade or Creeping Tar Pit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of one way to use it. Most of the decks that we looked at this week, I wouldn't really call control decks. At least the deck that I played, I don't think was a control deck, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I don't think the deck that Shane played was really a control deck. Certainly the one that you were on was Stan, but...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dave, I think the big reason for that, and I think the reason that people seem to have a renewed interest in Stoneforge outside of Hammer as like the equipment tutor there, is Cauldron Complete. Got printed in Modern Horizons 2, and people were like, oh, hey, we have a new powerful living weapon. It's a new 1-2 punch with our ever-reliable Batterskull. There's, of course, other interesting equipment options in Modern Horizons 2 that might be sneaky long-term surprises. I think Dave's going to talk about a deck featuring one of those as well.
Guess what? It's Nettlecyst that Shane is talking about.
Spoiled.
Just spoilers, just so we don't talk around it. But yeah, I think those are. I do think that that's one of the main reasons that people looked at it as far as trying a whole bunch of different shells for the card, because Living Weapon is a powerful mechanic, and Batterskull was really the only one that was super constructed playable, and now there's a couple more that really are constructed playable as well.
For sure. So instead of the somewhat slow clock of Batterskull or the swords being equipped onto other creatures, Cauldron Complete, 5/5 haste, indestructible, all that good stuff. And so people have been wanting to test that. Our goal today was to test these waters with these latest sort of blade style decks, or at least living weapon style decks. None of those silly hammers, like Dave was saying. We have this history out of the way. Let's maybe get into some decks. And Dave, I know you had some thoughts about the decks that we tested this week.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we should just talk about each one what we did. So, like I said, I didn't really play a control deck. I didn't really play a Stoneforge deck that had blade, that was a blade deck at all. The deck that I played was basically black-white artifact synergy, almost Nettlecyst deck. It was a full playset of Nettlecyst and cranial plating as the only targets that you could search up with Stoneforge Mystic. Leaned really hard into artifact synergies, heavy discard stuff from playing Thoughtseize, and also Tide Hollow Sculler, which is an artifact.
Whoa.
For early hand destruction.
I always forget it's an artifact. Artifact Zombie.
Yeah, Artifact Zombie. Aethersworn Canonist was in this deck. And also a few other things like Shadow Spear, Pithing Needle, like your kind of Urza Saga package, because this was a deck that was all about artifact synergies and making big constructs with Saga. This deck I picked up was a 4-0 prelim deck from about a week ago, piloted by MTGO player Talisker.
MTGO user.
Yeah. Stan, what kind of deck did you look at?
I played an Esper Stoneblade deck, so this one was a little bit more mid-rangey, more of a looked like it had some of the trappings of a control deck, though it wasn't based on counter magic. Instead, this is Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Fatal Push, Prismatic Ending as kind of your control package.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things that really drew me into this deck was that it was running a couple main Dakon Shadow Slayers.
Yeah.
Whoa. So
I was curious to see how that might be able to benefit a Stoneblade package, to see if I could ever get Dakon to -6 and, play an artifact for my hand or graveyard.
Yeah, I don't even know what the -6 does. I'll have to look at that card. I played a Griefanimatorblade deck that's been making the rounds. It keeps showing up in maybe some prelims and some leagues, and it's trying to staple two different strategies together using grief and hand disruption to maybe make the opponent have some early game stumbles. It gains value from Stoneforge Mystic, from Ephemerate. Maybe it can just cheese a win by quickly reanimating one of the great new non-legendary creatures from Modern Horizons 2, and more on that later. What I think is interesting, though, here is I feel like none of the decks we're talking about are like Stoneforge Mystic build-arounds, right?
Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like any of the decks that are running Stoneforge are Stoneforge Mystic build-arounds. Like it's often not the best card in the deck, and it's also not even plan A, I would say, in the decks as far as the way that they're really looking to go. Although stands might be an exception, but I just felt like as I looked at the list, a lot of times Stoneforge is just like a great kind of plan B that you can include in a deck that's trying to do something else. Or in the case of Shane's deck, you can have a plan A1 and plan A2 kind of.
Yeah. It's interesting too that like we're finally to the place where there's not just the Stoneforge package of like, hey, you play 4 Stoneforge, you play a Batterskull, and you play like Sword of Fire and Ice.
Yeah.
And maybe sideboard like another Color Hoser or something like that. Like Stoneforge is now like an equipment tutor that sometimes has some cool blades along for the ride too.
I wonder if, the quality of equipment just keeps getting better too. Even in core sets that print Colossal Hammer, we have killer equipment coming in, deck being printed for decks that are meant to be aggressive. And then you have things like Nettlecyst and Cauldron Complete, which are clearly being printed for more mid-rangey Stoneforge style decks. Whether or not every Nettlecyst deck is a Stoneforge deck, I think is, irrelevant. But I wonder if Stoneforge is the type of card that's always on the cusp of being like really good, even for moments in time, because we're just going to continue to get potentially powerful equipments that she can utilize and we can metagame with.
Yeah, totally think that makes sense. All right, should we go deep on some of these decks?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on our Stoneblade episode 2021, why don't we start with a deck that is Stone No Blades? I'll go first.
Yes. Stone
Equipment. Stone Cyst. So I misspoke a moment ago. So the deck that I played was piloted by Talisker, but it's in 8th place list from a challenge. I said it was a 4-0 from a prelim. I got my wires crossed there. So here's what the deck is. I think it's super interesting. I'm just going to read out the deck list really quickly. So 4 Esper Sentinel, 3 Aethersworn Canonist, 3 Ingenious Smith, 4 Stoneforge Mystic, and 4 Tidehollow Sculler is the creature package. One card I want to read really quickly, just because maybe people haven't seen it lately, is Aethersworn Canonist, which is a 2/2 for a generic and a white. It was in one of the Alara sets originally. I forget which one it was originally printed in. And it says, each player who has cast a non-artifact spell this turn can't cast additional non-artifact spells. So it's sort of like a rule of law for things that aren't artifacts, which is pretty interesting on a bear. It used to see some play in kind of hate bear strategies. Back in the day, it used to see play as a hate card against Storm sometimes too. But it turned out to be pretty cool in this deck. Definitely disrupted some of my opponents. Then for spells, I have 4 Thoughtseize in this deck. And then in the artifact package, 2 Welding Jar, 1 Pithing Needle, 4 Portable Hole, 1 Relic of Progenitus, 1 Shadow Spear, 1 Springleaf Drum, 1 Cranial Plating, and 4 Nettlecyst. As I mentioned, the only targets for Stoneforge Mystic are Shadow Spear, Cranial Plating, and Nettlecyst. You're basically getting Nettlecyst every single time you want Stoneforge Mystic, although there's a couple times where Cranial Plating and its instant speed equipability comes in really handy, and also Shadow Spear comes in handy to go and get for trample, and occasionally lifelink. And then the lands are actually pretty interesting in this deck too. As you can imagine, it's a black-white mana base. But there's also 4 Inkmoth Nexus in here, 4 Urza's Saga as well. And I really think that Urza's Saga is kind of the focus of this deck, because this deck even has 4 Goldmire Bridge. And in case you haven't played with these before, this is the tapped artifact dual land from Modern Horizons 2. Came in super handy at pumping up the size of your constructs. making your Nettlecyst bigger and other things like that. Just a cool card. You do have to play around the fact that it comes into play tapped, but I thought it was good, useful, everything like that as well. So what do you guys think about this deck?
Man, this mana base.
It's a little rough. I'll tell you the roughest part about this mana base is Tide Hollow Sculler was often tricky to get out on turn 2 every time when I really wanted it.
I mean, you have 11 untapped black-white sources total.
Yep.
And that is pretty sketch to always have mana for your Thoughtseize, to have mana for your Esper Sentinel. I think it's, if you count the Goldmire Bridge, if you're not really relying on playing a turn 1 play, it's a little bit better. But I'm curious about the tension between the artifact land doing the pumping and providing the artifact synergy versus just playing another untapped black-white source or just having some kind of access to that.
Yeah, I'm not convinced either way. I mean, I felt like it was nice to have the extra artifact bump because you're still reliant on cards that are +X based on the number of artifacts you have, and this is just a free way to get it to happen. So I don't know, but there were definitely a couple times where I was like, I really want to be able to cast Tide Hollow Sculler, and I can't. And the other thing is trying to decide if you're going to cast Esper Sentinel or Thoughtseize on turn 1 is often kind of tough to think about. Like, I think especially if you're in the dark, if you don't know what you're playing against first, I guess you would generally go Thoughtseize there. But boy, really want to get those cards off of Esper Sentinel as often and as early as you can, because that card really impressed me playing this deck. There were a lot of cards that I thought were really cool in here, but the two things that impressed me the most in this deck, I guess, were just Urza's Saga, because really I think this is an Urza's Saga deck above everything else, and then doubling down on constructs basically with Nettlecyst is kind of what this deck is. It's like we're just making constructs all the time. We're going to attack with it, and I had lots of plays where I was just like, oh, I'm going to turn 4 have 2 5/5s or something like that and just swing in with one of them. Like, that was kind of where this breaks up.
Is this your first Saga deck, Dave?
It is. Yeah. Do we have any quick tips for playing with Saga?
I don't know if I know the best way. It's definitely one of those skill testing cards, and whether or not you make a construct, if you use it for mana, if you use the mana that goes into making a construct into playing to the board. Like, there's a lot of tension there. And how early you play the Saga. Like, is it a turn 2 play? Is it a turn 4 play? Because you want to be able to keep playing your disruptive spells like Tide Hollow Sculler, like Stoneforge Mystic, and sort of use Saga as your long game card. But sometimes it can just be so explosive that you want to do it early.
I basically thought of it as my turn 2 play in this deck, because I think this deck is almost in on Saga first, and then Stoneforge is your later game plan. Where, if you have to, with later on, you'll go get a Nettlecyst with your Stoneforge and then play it and attach it to something. Or you'll dig something up with Ingenious Smith. I mean, the thing that's cool about Ingenious Smith, of course, is that there's so many artifacts in here that you're getting almost all of your creatures. You're getting a whole bunch of other things from your artifact suite. So I think that those things later in the game helped, but just pushing all in on an early Saga seemed like the best way to go to me in a bunch of different games that I played.
Yeah, because one of the things that I've experienced in playing Hammer, which of course features 4 Saga, is the tension I was mentioning earlier, which is like, what's my plan A versus my plan B here? And frequently it's not using my mana to make constructs because I need to be getting hammers on things. But then other times it's like, well, how are you going to beat me continuing to make constructs, get hammers out of my deck once it pops on Chapter 3? So Saga is just a flexible card, and I think we've come to realize like its place or its power level is not as busted as people said. And I remember Brian Artificer in our Slack, now Discord.
Yeah, the Serum Visions podcast.
Yeah, the Serum Visions podcast was pretty strong and made good arguments in terms of Saga's not broken, y'all. Because even though it does a lot for a little, it's still expensive. Mm-hmm. And it's a tempo negative play sometimes. You have to pump a lot of mana into it. The eventuality can be really good, but it certainly is a tempo question of when you're using it and how you're using it.
Sure. I mean, the one thing I'd say real quick about Saga is if you want to keep mana parity, the trick that I found is that you just search, when you get to the search trigger, you just search up Springleaf Drum, right?
Yeah, that's clutch.
So then you're just kind of like, okay, I'm going to make a construct on turn 3, then I'm going to make a construct on turn 4, play a land, use my mana, get Springleaf Drum, play another 2 mana threat of some kind. So you have these like massive turn 4s because of that sometimes, which is pretty interesting. I don't know if I think the card is broken, but I do think it's very good and very pervasive. I guess let's say even as decks kind of come and go that really focus on it.
Quick question, Dave.
Yeah.
How did you do with this deck?
You know what? I actually felt like I did pretty good with this deck at first.
So 2-3, a 2-0 into a 2-3.
So it was actually a 2-0 into a 3-2. Okay. But what happened was, so first match I played Green Tron, and the thing that was nice with this against Tron was drawing some extra cards, being able to Thoughtseize and Tide Hollowsculler away their payoffs, of course, so that they can do whatever they want to do with getting their mana up, but I'm taking away all the cards they're trying to ramp to. I think it was pretty good in that matchup. Portable Hole is a card that like I really, really wanted to love, but there were so many places where I felt like I couldn't actually cast Portable Hole, and just Tron playing against a bunch of big mana decks is kind of like the epitome of that happening. So I played Green Tron and I beat them in 2, and then I played Blue Tron and beat them in 2, and that one was much more of a like Urza Saga kind of beatdown matchup where I don't remember the big play that I had there, but that seemed like I was going away. The match that really stuck with me is that going 2-0, going into my third match, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to hop in the Discord and stream this for everybody in the nation. And so I did a match against Amulet Titan in the Discord, and it was a heartbreaker match where I lost game 1 to a bunch of Valakut triggers, won game 2 with a whole bunch of hand disruption, and then game 3 had them down with a whole bunch of hand disruption again. They had no cards in hand. They didn't really have any payoffs, and they top decked and engineered explosives with 4 lands on the battlefield against me when I had a bunch of 2 CMC cards, and they just destroyed me, just blew me out from there because I had two Primeval Titans under Tide Hollowscullers. So we were talking on the chat, and I was like, I think I win unless they top deck an Engineer Explosives this turn. And then they take their turn, and they're like, Engineer Explosives. And I was like,
it's why you play the cards, but you're still sad when it happens against you.
It was a bummer for sure. So I was 2-1, and then I won the 4th match, and I lost my 5th match against Eldrazi Tron. I don't remember what the 4th match was. It was pretty late at night. But I felt like the deck was really kind of humming at the beginning. And then as I got deeper into it, I was like, well, I don't really have a good plan against Eldrazi Tron. I felt like I had a decent plan against anything that's really payoff based, but I didn't play against any super aggro decks. And I feel like super aggro decks probably would just stomp me with this deck. Although I do have 4 Portable Hole, which is nice, and I make giant things pretty fast, so I could be wrong about that. Yeah, but so I got a 3-2.
Such a Shadow Spear. Like I feel like Shadow Spear is so good against aggro decks. It almost is your Batterskull in this strategy.
Yeah. But I think that some of the things that we talked about kind of like rang true for me here. One is the mana base is kind of awkward sometimes. Another one is that the clock is like not super fast. And so even though you're making you're making a bunch of big constructs, sometimes if they deal with the first couple ones and then you got to go on to the next thing, then they can really slow you down. So I know that Shadow Spear is supposed to help with that. I think that I probably should have aggressively gotten Shadow Spear more often to give things trample so that I could close through, say, my Titan opponent kept playing Arboreal Graziers, and that would just buy them a turn, and then I would attack in and would buy them a turn. And so if I had something with trample, it would have helped close that gap a little bit more quickly, I think. But this deck is, even though it makes a bunch of big creatures really fast, it's not the fastest thing in the world, even when you get that done. So I'd say that it felt pretty solid, and the synergy felt really, really good, where you're like, I'm going to have giant constructs but it didn't feel like how when you play a deck and you're like, wow, I feel like I'm playing a different game from my opponent. Like this felt very much like the same speed or a little slower than the rest of the format.
Dave, did you have any much chance to play former Modern All-Star Edge Champion out of the board?
I brought it in a couple of times, but I don't know if I brought it in at the right times. I think that is your real, like, another one of your aggro cards that you want to bring in there, because like you don't really want to play Tide Hollow Sculler against, a deck that can just lightning bolt it and get their card back.
No.
So I think that bringing in Edge Champion there, you pretty much have Metalcraft all the time. And so bringing in Edge Champion, I think, is pretty good in those cases. The other thing I would say is that Dispatch was actually pretty good, which is just straight up, exile a creature, because I had Metalcraft all the time. And also Fragmentize was not bad as well as a way to be able to kill an Urza Saga or an artifact for a single mana. It actually came in pretty handy here and there, as far as things go. Those are all cards that were in the board.
Did you feel like the Stoneforge package, which I guess is just 4 Stoneforges and then like Nettlecyst and Shadowspear, Cranial Plating, do you think Stoneforge elevated this deck? Or could this be even somehow more all in on Urza Saga and trying to play more of an artifact deck rather than like counting on equipment to maybe help close?
Could it be Steel Shaper's Gift?
So here's the thing that I think is really interesting about this is that, I think Stoneforge Mystic could theoretically have been Steel Shaper's Gift, right? But with Stoneforge Mystic, you still get a creature out of it, which is kind of nice. It's that you can equip a piece of equipment too, if you have to. And also being able to drop certain pieces of equipment at instant speed, or to be able to up your artifact count, or, cheat on mana and things like that is nice. I think the thing that this deck really does, though, that's interesting compared to the ones that run Cauldron Complete, because if you notice, this deck has no Cauldron Complete in the 75, like we said, is that it's not going to get destroyed if my game plan involves me getting a big card with Stoneforge Mystic and then having my Stoneforge Mystic killed. So I really, in this deck, don't care if someone kills Stoneforge Mystic after I get my card, right? So I think that from a card economy perspective, that's pretty good, actually, because if people kill it, I'm like, sure, I'll just play Nettlecyst on the next turn. It's fine. Instead of dropping it for 2 mana, I just pay 3 mana for it. No big deal. And that's what I thought was really interesting about this design, to be honest.
You mentioned that you weren't necessarily thrilled with Portable Hull, and it just kind of felt awkward to the gameplay. Those are 4 slots. Why not just make those Cauldras and Batterskulls and Swords? Play the exact same deck. Just take out your Portable Hulls.
Because I don't want the mana cost to be that much. That's what I think is big, is that I don't think you want Cauldra. I feel like, actually, this take on a Stoneforge Mystic package felt more appropriate for the metagame right now to me than one, again, like I said, where you're relying on expensive cards that you might have a hard time getting up to the mana for. Because I just get to like play so many different cards and activate Urza Saga and then drop a Stoneforge Mystic, and then I can play the target, and I'm never worried about having it killed. Exactly. So it's tough. I mean, I think that, of course, part of the reason I didn't think Portable Hull was that good was because I played against Greentron, Bluetron, Eldrazi Tron, and Amulet Titan. And Portable Hull is great against Amulet Titan, actually, if you really think about it, because it gets rid of Amulet as well, which is very helpful. Yeah. But, I liked this deck. I might give it another shot. It really kind of, in a weird way, reminded me of the old Eldrazi Taxes lists that are kind of like, I have a lot of disrupt, and maybe that's because of Tide Hollow Sculler is being it. It's like, I have a lot of hand disruption, but the hand disruption is kind of fragile, and so I have to think really hard about what I'm going to take. But then also, my deck can put out threats, but it's not like that fast, and so you can get outpaced in the mid game, sort of, even though you're sort of a mid-range deck. But the artifact synergy was so strong that I kind of feel like at least that theme really came in and was pretty cool. And I have a place out of Urza Saga, so I was thrilled to finally get a chance to play a bunch of Urza Saga in one of the decks that like is maybe less known for these. So I might sleeve this up and take it to like an FNM if I was to ever go to an FNM in the near future.
With all your free Friday nights?
With all my free time and other things going on. Because it was fun. It was fun to play, really.
Well, that's
not what matters, Dave.
That's key.
Yeah. And I did decent. I got a burrito. That's all good. I opened a terrible card in the treasure chest and move on with my life. It's fine. But Stan, let's talk about something that's a little bit more along the lines of the old school Stoneforge, the way that most people think about playing a Stoneforge.
For sure.
So it's got all your favorite colors.
Well, it's got two of my favorite colors, that's for sure. Yeah, most of my experience playing Stoneforge is either in Jeskai or Azorius Blade.
Stan. Before we get into this deck, you mentioned it has two of your favorite colors. I just realized you're not really a black mage, are you?
I own a lot of Magic cards. I
You
tried
play
playing
Death Shadow?
all five. I've always appreciated Death Shadow. Never got good with it. I own basically all of this deck except for Dakons and Vindicates.
You got some Dothies?
I have a playset of Dothi, yes.
My man.
So I like playing black. I've just never found a black deck that really jived with me.
Yeah.
And that was part of why I even picked the strategy is it felt familiar, right? It felt like an offshoot of the Azorius or maybe Jeskai Stoneforge decks that I played in the past. And B, this seemed like a good way to play with Dothi and some other really proactive black cards like Thoughtseize and Inquisition that I thought might be able to give me an edge in the metagame. Kaya's Guile is in the main and Vindicate, two cards that I think are pretty good right now. Vindicate being able to literally tag anything, Kaya's Guile being good against Murktide decks or the occasional other graveyard strategy. I was just, like I said, I was really curious about Dakon, Shadow Slayer. It's like a budget mythic planeswalker from MH2. Let's see if it's actually any good. I will say I didn't do very well in my league, and I think one of the principal differences between this Esper strategy and some of the other Stoneblade decks that I tend to have more experience with is that this is super proactive. It doesn't really play reactively ever. There isn't a single counterspell in the 75 except for a couple ceremonious rejections on the side.
Tell us a little bit about how this deck is built.
Yeah, that's a good question, Shane. So 10 creatures, 4 Dothi, only 3 Stoneforge, and then also has 3 Sanctifier and Vec. Okay. We have 6 Planeswalkers, 3 Teferi, Time Ravelers, 1 Kaya Orzhov Usurper, which is a card, as you know, is very near and dear to my heart for no real reason, except I just think she's cool. A cool 3-mana walker.
It was one of our first spoiler episodes where we talked about 3-mana walkers being under a lot of consideration for Modern, and then they printed 4 of them in the next few sets.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and one of them was Dovin Bond.
Stan's favorite.
That's right. Yeah, so we got 2 Dakon, a Kaya, and 3 Teferi. And then, your Stoneforge package is Sword of Fire and Ice, Batterskull, and Kaldra. 24 lands, and then 17 spells. One of those spells is Lingering Souls.
Ooh. So before we get too deep into the spells themselves, because I think you kind of gave the outline of that whole package already, what do you think Dakon is trying to bring to this deck on?
Yeah, so let's read Dakon, okay? He's a little interesting, and I kind of misplayed with him myself just because I didn't fully understand everything that he was about. But he's a 3-mana walker with 0 loyalty, but when he ETBs, he comes down with loyalty equal to the number of lands you control. So he kind of rewards you for playing him late, and I really think that he's the type of walker that can help you manage the long game, because his +2 is Surveil 2. So, you're filtering your hand. -3 is exile target creature, and then he has -6, put an artifact card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield.
Dave, imagine this walker with Surveil 2 in a deck running white 5 years ago. Would you have 1 Lingering Souls, or would you have 4?
Oh, yeah. Great point. Wow, 4 Lingering Souls. How the mighty have fallen. Right? I mean, it's interesting that Dakon is in sort of like a backup Stoneforge for these expensive targets in a way, because it lets you cheat them into play for a low mana cost, but it doesn't do anything as far as searching them goes. So it's an interesting kind of thing there. But of course, the other thing that goes with it is that it can just straight up kill a creature, which is a nice fallback as well, I guess. What was your impression of playing this card?
I think that he's a tricky walker in a difficult deck, and only 1 league is not enough to figure out exactly the optimal way to use all of your resources. And the fact that his static is what determines how many loyalty he comes down with was actually something that you have to be keenly aware of when you're playing him and really think about how you're going to use him. And if you're not paying close enough attention, you'll just he'll die immediately or on the crackback. While I do think that he could be pretty good at managing that long game, he never really felt like a bomb. +1 to Surveil 2 is not drawing a card. And with the exception of your 1 Lingering Souls, you don't really have a ton to do with the graveyard.
Yeah, that's kind of like an issue I'm seeing is just the plus doesn't synergize with anything.
Yeah. So I think that he could be replaced.
He'd be replaced.
More
wow.
Lingering Souls. Yeah.
We put 1 Lingering Souls in and the 4th Stoneforge and just kind of go back.
Maybe.
Kind of.
Or, maybe find room for some counter spells.
Liliana.
Yeah.
More Kayas.
Oh, now you're talking.
Yeah, it's interesting. This deck reads like it wants to be a control deck, but then it doesn't really have cards that let you control the game other than removal, right? There's no counter spells. There's no, I guess there's a couple dams in the sideboard as far as wraths go, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Those 17 spells, I'm not going to read actual counts, but we're looking at Fatal Push, Inquisition, Prismatic Ending, Thoughtseize, Esper Charm, which is not a good card.
Oh no, people are going to send us letters.
Please send them to Shane.
It's always a 2-for-1, your favorite.
Yeah, that's true. I would rather play Archmage's Charm is the answer, though. It's got only 1 Kaya's Guile, which I think it could afford more of, just because Kaya's Guile is both a reactive spell that can help control certain game states, but it can also give you a threat, or it can even cushion your life total sometimes. Lingering Souls and Vindicate. Vindicate, that's an awesome card. Just being able to blow up opponents' lands, being able to blow up anything. I never felt bad drawing Vindicates, and the fact that it only runs 3, I think, is a concession to it being 3 CMC.
Mm-hmm.
But you could maybe even be correct to run 4 of them.
So what was playing this deck like then, Stan?
Hard and frustrating. I think there's a little bit of tension when you want to figure out if you're supposed to play proactively with some of your hand disruption, and when you're supposed to actually lay down threats. Because you don't have ways to really protect Stoneforge unless you're able to snipe a removal spell from an opponent's hand on turn 1 or any turn before you cast your Stoneforge. And I think that there's, situations where Dauthi and Sanctifier and Vec are just bomb cards for certain matchups. Sanctifier against a Rakdos deck is insane, and she just wins on her own. Dauthi against any deck that cares about its graveyard a little bit, I think is also fantastic. But if you don't have ways to protect some of these threats, they sort of just felt like 2 drops that are waiting to get destroyed by practically any removal spell.
Yeah, and it's tough because there's only 10 creatures here, so your threats are kind of at a premium. And so you got to keep an eye out.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that there's 12 creatures because of Batterskull and Kaldra. And of our 24 lands, one of those lands is a Castle Ardenvale. So, eventually you're making some creatures there. Some 1/1s.
Are you, Stan? Are you surviving long enough to do that?
Guys.
Yeah, you're firing up your Keldoran outpost and seeing how it goes.
I mean, sure, yeah. I will say, Castle Ardenvale was relevant in one of the games that I played. I had a bad league. I went 0-4 drop, and it was tight here and there. And there were a couple times when I was like, I really love these Lingering Souls. I wish I had more than just the 1, because these 4 flyers are going to win me this game. And then eventually they get picked off or blocked by blocked by endurances. Yeah. I think that maybe this is a Stan issue, but I think that Stoneforge is much better in a mid-range control deck where she is surrounded by protection spells and where you're playing a control deck that uses her to finish. If you want to play her in a more proactive deck, I think she's great in Hammer, where she serves the plan, but she's not necessarily central to that plan.
Yeah, this is how I feel about the deck I was playing too, for what it's worth.
Right. And this is a spoiler, this is how I feel about the deck I was playing. And I think we can talk about this as when we summarize, but I think this is just a consequence of Orzhov Blade decks, which is fundamentally the type of strategy we all ran this week.
Yeah.
Mine had no blades.
Okay.
Yeah, yours
All
just
right.
had like cysts,
Yeah.
which you should check that out, man.
Yeah. And my nettles.
So yeah, like I said, I think this deck is more challenging than I gave it credit for, and I was perhaps naive to think I've played Stoneblade in the past. I can just load this up in a league and I'll know what to do. I've played Thoughtseizes before. How hard can it be to play Thougtseize in a Stoneforge deck? But there's a lot of nuances in figuring out how to actually sequence your threats with your disruption, with your proactive disruption. That these decks have been 5-0ing. I think they've been appearing in top 32s periodically, so there's something to them. And maybe part of that has to do with trying to get lucky with your hate bears and making sure that they do line up with the right environment overall. That perhaps there's an Esper Blade deck that you can play where your creature suite is a little bit more tuned to a specific environment or a modern challenge, an expected modern challenge. Because, I played against Mill as just one of my matchups, and I just felt like I couldn't do anything. Like, because I didn't have a one of Kaya's Guile or a random Eldrazi in the side, it was just like, well, I guess I'm going to lose really quickly to Mill. And I did.
No counter spells. That
None. Yeah.
causes a
And
problem,
maybe Mill
too.
is just really, really good.
I mean, I think it is for a side note, but
Yeah, as my side note, 2 crabs is the new 2 amulets. Like, I think if a Mill player is able to get 2 crabs on the board by turn 2, it's like so scary.
Oh, yeah.
Can't fetch.
Real scary.
Yeah, can't do anything. If they just hit land drops and some of those lands are fetches, it's game over.
all right. So you give this one a heave. Stan?
Yeah, I mean, note to Stan in the past, if there's like, if some radio frequencies get to me a week ago, just play Jeskai for my sake. I don't think this deck jived with me. But, guys, I'm human. I've got a lot on my mind right now. I'm trying to, prepare the youth of the world to be future leaders.
And prepare the
members of
world for your
society.
future youth. So
Yeah.
Right on, man. Well, good attempt.
I tried.
So we had 2 kind of courses. So our challenges were the beginning course of the meal, and now we had kind of like 2 appetizers. And just Shane, I know you're going to bring this main course to life, because there is one really interesting Stoneforge deck that's been floating around the last few weeks that's really kind of a weird grafting of 2 different game plans together. And you were really excited to play this deck.
Yeah, but you know what happens when I get excited. Reality hits. What I played, as I mentioned earlier on, was like this sort of Griefblade Reanimator deck. I kind of forget where I found it. I think it was just sort of like on the hunt for these various Orzhov Reanimator strategies that have been popping up here and there. And I came across this one, and I thought, you know what? Why not?
Buddy, this deck was having a moment. Like, over the last week or two, it was definitely the talk of the town, I think, for a little while.
Yeah. The general concept of this deck, as far as I can tell at least, I didn't make it, is to present multiple angles of attack in the same disruptive shell. 2 great tastes together at last. By blending an Orzhov Stoneblade shell that has Stoneforge, Grief, Ephemerate, Thoughtseize, Prismatic Ending, some swords, along with the Reanimator package of Unmarked Grave, Persist, Priest of Fell Rites, and then a few powerful non-legendaries in Ashen Rider, Sarah's Emissary, Archon of Cruelty. The deck is offering the potential of this disruptive deck that can present a clock in the form of Calder Complete or Batterskull, or maybe reanimate something busted, or maybe just be blinking or reanimating some griefs to strip your opponent's hand. And so when I was looking at this deck, my initial question was, how well is it going to succeed at both of these strategies while being expert in none? Because it's not a true reanimator deck. It doesn't have full play sets of Archon of Cruelty. It doesn't have 4 Priest of Fell Rites or Grief or Thoughtseize even, and it's not this true Orzhov mid-range deck with things like Solitude and Dothy Voidwalker and Vindicate, Fatal Push, things like that. And so can a deck like this really split the difference and offer the best of both worlds? And that was my mission, gentlemen, to find out.
And what did you find out?
Be honest.
Yeah.
Be honest. Tell us honestly.
I don't know.
I don't know what I found out.
there's some fundamental flaws in the way that this deck is, I think, designed and built, but that sounds really rude to the people who are winning with it and to the people who are originating the strategy. And it's certainly possible that I'm misplaying, more possible than not. But I'll get into kind of what I mean by that. And so I think that the games where the deck did feel good involved the Reanimator side of the deck and not this sort of fair mid-range strategy that we've been talking about. I think we've been talking about, none of us really played kind of just straight up Orzhov Blade style decks, but we're kind of getting at what is Orzhov typically trying to do when it's playing its normal game. One of the big strategies that was given support in Horizons 2 was Reanimator. So we have cards like Unmarked Grave, one in the black, search your library for a non-legendary creature, put it in your graveyard. Persist, also one in the black, allows you to return that non-legendary creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, albeit with a -1/-1 counter on it. And so along with those two cards, these powerful and expensive non-legendary creatures were printed as well, primarily Archon of Cruelty and Sarah's Emissary. Archon of Cruelty 6 black for a 6/6 flyer. When it ETBs or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You get to draw a card and gain 3 life. Pretty cool. Sarah's Emissary, 4 white for a 7/7 flyer. When she ETBs, choose a card type. You and creatures you control have protection from the chosen card type. So the games that the deck felt the most conclusively kind of great were against creature decks with minimal or like no hand or stack interaction, and where I had like a nut draw or a pretty quick draw into Unmarked Grave and persisting something back that was awesome out of the graveyard. Archon, interestingly, seems to get the most notice, but it was Sarah's Emissary that was the more conclusive door slammer for me. Like against decks like Eldrazi or Elves, which I faced in a league, getting Sarah's Emissary and naming creature was enough to just cement that win. Like they have so few tools, if any, to stop Sarah's Emissary, especially with the clock that she's presenting. I played like 13 or so matches with this deck, and I was never in a position where getting Archon of Cruelty seemed like the best choice.
Yeah, when you were reading the card out, I was just sitting here once again going, why are people excited to reanimate this card?
Right?
I don't know if I totally understand. I think that there's a couple cool things that it does, but
yeah, I was never in a position where I was so far ahead that I felt like Archon of Cruelty was the best choice. Maybe I always felt like I was maybe kind of on the back foot. If I was being overwhelmed with creatures and I needed to lock down the board with Emissary, that was great. But it's really weird to live in a world where even an early Archon, it didn't feel like the best option to stick. Either I was feeling behind and I didn't think that Archon would catch me up, or its ETB didn't feel strong enough at the time. If your opponent has 5 cards in hand and you're reanimating an Archon, it's well, is this thing going to just get killed by a Path to Exile or a Terminate or an Unholy Heat? Because it's a 6/6 even if you don't persist it. If you reanimate it some other way, it's still a 6/6. How quickly is this thing going to die? Am I going to be able to close the game? It sort of just felt like Sarah's Emissary naming a card type was the better answer most of the time. And I might have been making mistakes where I should have just relied on Archon of Cruelty. Let's not live in a world where they always have it. Let's live in a world where I'm gaining 3. It's a 6-point life delta, and they're discarding a card. And every time I attack with this thing, it's happening again, and I'm drawing cards. Maybe that was a better choice sometimes, but it never felt like it to me.
Yeah, I guess the fact that it effectively swings for 9 in the air is pretty good.
That's a good clock.
Yeah.
What's really hilarious or perhaps sad is the persisted Sarah's Emissary didn't always get the job done for me either because of Unholy Heat, which is just a truly game-changing card for the format. If I'm up against some multicolored deck with creatures and I'm well, I better name creatures or else I'm not going to win this game, and it comes back as a 6/6 when it's persisted, then zap Unholy Heat for a single red mana, and they just continue to beat down with their creatures, and I'm dead. So that felt pretty bad. That being said, there were games when the disruptive angle of the deck, the non-reanimator side of it, allowed me to play like a longer game, and I'm keeping things like ad nauseum at bay. They're not piecing together what they need, at least most of the time, at least. Like these busted grief draws where you're evoking it and then you're ephemerating it or you're Malakir rebirthing it, certainly does hamstring those combo style decks. But none of you had grief in your decks, right?
No, I was surprised that it wasn't around as much as everybody thought it was going to be at the beginning of this format. You know, a lot of the early decks were the like Grief plus Stoneblade package, and then they kind of went away.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about my experiences with Grief, because I did get to do the thing. Like, I did the Ephemerate the Evoked Grief on turn 1. I did the Malakir's Rebirth of Evoked Grief on turn 1. Everyone was afraid this was going to ruin the format, and I think I still ended up losing those games like 75-80% of the time. Like, because here's what happens, at least with this deck, is like you're stripping 3 cards out of someone's hand by turn 2, and that seems great. But what that really ends up is that you're attacking on turn 3 with a 3-2, which is hardly a good clock. It just gives your opponent plenty of time to draw into all of the good cards that are in their deck. Like, they can find their combo pieces because they're so redundant now. They can do whatever they need to while you are sitting there with a mopey 3-2 on, you know, that's swinging in every turn maybe until they get 2 blockers down, because it does have menace. And meanwhile, you've shredded your hand a little bit. This deck seems to mulligan a lot, in my opinion, because sometimes you just are like, well, I have these random cards that don't work together, and I'll get more on that later. And it seems like the griefing thing should get you ahead, but it's like, it feels like the old disruption without a clock isn't getting the job done adage that we've talked about since like probably the 3rd month of doing this podcast, right? Is like, evoking grief is expensive in terms of your cards, and it does, you know, it seems like that's card advantage, but the rest of your deck isn't coming together often enough to let you really close the game down. Again, it's this issue with the clock that your deck is presenting so often doesn't feel like enough.
Yeah, and it's just in this particular color pair, it feels like you just don't quite get there. Although, I mean, we do have 3 giant clocks in this deck and then also we have Cauldron Complete too, so
right,
yeah,
there are attempts at making it happen here.
Yeah, there's attempts for sure, but like one of the issues is like, yeah, like if I'm doing the evoking grief thing, that's 3 cards in my opener that I'm down. Like, it's grief, it's the pitch card, and it's the ephemerate, which is largely useless after kind of the turn that you cast it, besides the rebound. Man, I do have to say, I don't like ephemerate in decks like this, because like it feels like it should be big game, and it feels like you should always have these great targets for ephemerating things, but you often don't.
Well, I mean, you don't really care about ephemerating Stoneforge, right? Like,
no, because you have 2 targets.
Yeah, in your deck. And it's like, okay, well, they're both expensive. I don't know which ones I'm going to want to get anyway. You know, not that, but like, if you get one, is the other one really that different? It's probably not. And then, you know, you can ephemerate Archon and Ashen Rider, which are both like reasonable targets for that.
Yeah, for sure.
And you can ephemerate Grief, and that's kind of like all there is to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Ephemerate felt really dead in my hand, and I guess that's kind of like an issue I have with the deck on the whole, is when you play a deck that is a kit of parts coming together, when you don't draw slot A for tab A, you know what I mean? Like, then you're just like, then tab A is useless. Like, just you have a 3rd persist that you draw when you have nothing in your graveyard. You have when you have an unmarked grave getting something into your yard, but no way to get the card back. You have a Priest of Fell Rights that you can potentially play to the battlefield, but nothing to reanimate it with it if you untap. And that was just the issue with this deck over and over again, where the kit of parts that ostensibly were in this deck just felt like they weren't there for me. And there's no way to filter your draw. There's no way to really get ahead on cards in this deck besides like a singleton Castle Lochthwain if you have time to be playing that. But I almost never did. The issue with presenting a clock, like I mentioned, like we have disruption but no clock, it just comes down to that dual personality nature of the deck. Like this Reanimator package is like predicated on getting certain specific draws of your deck, and they don't have redundancy in them, right? Like I don't have 8 unmarked grave effects.
Right.
I don't have 8 persist effects necessarily. Like you could sort of call Priest of Felrights one, but that has its own issues because it's creature based and not spell based. And unmarked grave is like the easiest way to get that Reanimator target in the graveyard because it operates independently of any other card in your hand. Like you don't have to have another piece. You just have to cast it and then get tutor something out of your deck into your graveyard. But it's like the other ways that you have of getting cards in the graveyard, like ostensibly are thoughts using yourself.
Mhm.
Right.
You could use the one of collective brutality with like an escalate clause. You can +1 Liliana, like you've got 1 Liliana in this deck, and discard something you want to reanimate. Like thoughts using yourself to get a card in the graveyard kind of borders on lunacy because
The payoff isn't quite good enough, huh?
it's just like, I mean, it costs you 2 cards and basically does nothing without the reanimation spell in your hand as well. So it's like a 3-card combo in your opener, right? And then it opens you up to Graveyard Hate. That's running rampant right now. These other options don't feel quite as useless that I mentioned, but it does require you to have the reanimation target, the pitching spell, and then a way to get that card back out of the graveyard to present any kind of reasonable threat to your opponent. And this ostensibly, like you got it earlier, Dave, is like where Stoneforge should be coming in. Like the deck chooses to run 3, which I think is probably wrong. Like I think you probably want the full playset, especially because there's some main deck inclusions like a single dam, the really useless feeling on burial rites. Like it's just not cost effective enough. Like I just never got to a place where I wanted to be playing on burial rites.
Yeah.
And so Stoneforge, like you said, Dave, has those 2 targets, Batterskull, Cauldron Complete. This should be able to present a clock. It should be able to stabilize a game with Batterskull, like it always, like it has been trying to do for a few years now. And Cauldron gets that clock down with games that have low interaction, and it can survive with its indestructibility and things like that. But Stoneforge, to me, still felt like it always has in Modern, which is like it needs to survive. And we're living in a format where creature decks, especially with low creature count, you cannot rely on that unless you have counter magic.
Right.
If we're relying, like Stan said, if we're relying on stripping the removal from our opponent and trusting that they don't draw it. And that is not, in my experience, ever proven reliable and successful. Like it's just like there's a lot of removal, there's a lot of top decks that can remove it. You don't have a lot of other threats in this deck that your opponent has to remove. So like Stoneforge is just not long for the world once you cast it.
Right.
A couple quick questions about you playing this deck. How often were you running into Graveyard Hate? And is it safe to assume that mostly shuts you down unless you do draw the Stoneforge?
There's some options. I mean, like one, yes, you see a lot of Graveyard Hate. It's all over the place. There's Tormod's Crypts, there's Relic of Progenitus, there's Endurances, there's, it's all over. It runs the gamut of all the things you expect to see and have seen. And what's good about the deck, I think, is that you can get it out of their hand fairly early sometimes. And when it does hit the board, things like Prismatic Ending, things like Fracture, things like Seal of Cleansing do help clean up those tools. And so it's kind of like the option to get down a seal and pop it if you need to make them pop their Graveyard Hate. Like the single use Graveyard Hate is more easy to get around of than things like Leyline of the Void, right? Because Leyline of the Void is going to require me to get one of my 2 Seals of Cleansing, maybe get my 1 Fracture out of the graveyard and cross my fingers. Whereas the one-time use things, you can sort of play around. You can build up a hand that has an unmarked grave and a persist in it, and then once you are able to get that piece of Graveyard Hate off the battlefield, then you can one turn just unmarked grave persist and get your card back out, which is great when it happens, but a lot of times they are presenting the disruption plus clock that is so challenging for me to be doing, and they're winning the game while I'm just struggling to find my anti-hate pieces. What's weird about Stoneforge, going back to that, is that even Cauldron Complete, I mean, I don't know if you all have played with this card, Stan, I think you have.
Mm-hmm.
I weirdly didn't think Cauldron Complete was that great, even against like non-interactive decks, where it's like they don't have any creatures. Like, it's weird to say that like a hasty 5/5 with a lot of keywords on turn 3 doesn't feel that amazing, because it's still like it's like a 4-turn clock. And modern combo decks have so many ways to be finding ways to kill you in that time span. Like, if I'm presenting a Cauldron Complete and I'm not backing it up with maybe some more griefing or maybe reanimating something useful out of the graveyard, or also adding to my clock, then I'm just going to get Living Ended, or I'm going to get Ad Naused, or I'm going to, any number of combos can get in the way of killing them quickly with a Cauldron Complete.
Yeah, I mean, you would think with all this ability to disrupt someone's hand, you'd feel pretty impervious to combo decks. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
it sounds like it always felt like it wasn't quite enough, or you were paying too much for the privilege of disrupting their hand so badly, and sometimes they just get it together anyway.
Yeah, it's just not, like, sometimes it's fine, and sometimes it's definitely getting you there. But I just feel like I wish that I had the opportunity to play it against creature decks more, but I never had a Cauldron Complete down against like a opposing creature strategy where it's like, you can't attack in because I'm going to be like exiling your stuff when it blocks or something like that because it has first strike. And I'm more, when the creature decks are coming down and I try to get my Stoneforge down, they're just zapping it with something. Any number of pieces of removal is taking care of my Stoneforge as they continue to attack in, because of course they're running creature interaction, or they're running burn because they're trying to keep the board clear for their creatures to get in.
Can I ask one more card specific question?
Please do.
How important was the land side of Malakir Rebirth?
Like, how important was just like having a tapped black land?
Right, just like having the fail state on that card specifically. Because I was thinking
that was fine.
So I was thinking about what you were saying about Sarah's Emissary coming down as a 6/6. And, Malakir Rebirth is this card type that gets reprinted a lot. There's like tons of single black instants,
bring something back from the graveyard. If it dies, bring it back kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's this new one in the D&D set called Feign Death, which is this effect, but it comes back with a +1/+1 counter for a single black
Sweet.
mana. I almost wonder, like, is the land half of Malakir Rebirth worth it when you can actually like play a slightly different version of the deck that makes maybe your griefs hit a little harder if they stick around, and can also maybe help protect a Sarah's Emissary or even an Archon of Cruelty from Unholy Heat?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think the best thing that Malakir Rebirth offers you is flexibility, surprise. Like, it's a 21 land deck, at least the way it's built right now, and then Malakir Rebirth offers a 22nd and 23rd option. And this is a somewhat land-hungry deck, I think. Like, I frequently want to be double spelling with at least 4 mana up. And so it's, I think, valuable to have as many land drops as you can hit. And so Malakir Rebirth lets you kind of play a land off-tempo when you need to. Like, okay, I've got enough mana to do what I want this turn. I can Malakir Rebirth, tapped land, play the Malakir Mire or whatever it's called, and get that down. So I think it's an important card because of a number of things. One, it can prevent against certain types of removal. It can allow you to do some blinky shenanigans for grief, or even, like you said, is like it's something that maybe can get that 7th point of toughness on your Sarah's Emissary, so you can maybe preemptively dodge an Unholy Heat, like just get it out of the way already, like when they're tapped out or something like that. So there's flexibility there, which is nice. I think I should summarize the deck, and so we can talk about Stoneforge as we close out. I think that the real issue of the deck, and I think I've been banging this drum, is that there's not a lot of consistency here.
Yeah.
Like, the cards don't have a lot of individual power. I mean, of course they do, but some of them are uncastable, right? Like, there's a lot of power in Sarah's Emissary, but she costs 7 mana. And so the combo pieces don't have a lot of redundancy at all in the deck. So, like, you're mulling for reasonable opening hands that do something, and then you're sort of like top decking, or like you're hoping to draw one of your 4 persists in the deck, for instance. Like, and meanwhile, you're just so far behind on tempo frequently of what's happening in Modern around you that you sort of feel kind of helpless. I haven't had time to test a pure Reanimator strategy, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that's what's going to be more consistent in the Reanimator end of things, right? Like, it has more copies of everything you want to be doing. It has more reanimation targets. Has more ways to get those reanimation targets in the graveyard. Like, Reanimator itself is like using bone shards and more copies of Collective Brutality. It's got 4 Archon of Cruelty. So, like, you have more ways to be getting things in the graveyard. And then you can afford to run things like Night's Whisper that accelerates your draws, recover from your griefing if you're like doing some grief shenanigans. Like, and these Reanimator decks are then running Stoneforge in the side to offer a juke against graveyard hosing, which I think is like a fun concept. I wonder how well it works in reality, but that might be kind of a better way to do it, where it's like, I'm not splitting the difference until I have to. And so looking at this deck through that Stoneforge Mystic lens, which is kind of the original goal of this episode, I don't really see how this is the proper home for her. Like, Blade decks or equipment decks at their core at least need to protect Stoneforge in some way so that you're not ending up with a stranded Batterskull, with a stranded Cauldron Complete rotting in your hand, like yet another piece of like card inefficiency that I'm already dealing with. And like, maybe you're just offering up enough removal targets. Like, your deck, Stan, even I think had better targets for removal in Sanctifier, in Dothy. Like, you can eventually untap with her and stick a good threat because you have gotten through their early removal issues. And so, like, this deck just really kind of offers like a little bit not enough of each world. Mm-hmm. I'm hesitant to tell people this is like how I would approach the Modern meta right now. Like, if you want to reanimate. If you want to Orzhov Stoneblade. And I don't think that you're pulling anything over on someone by having both. Because, like, I think both of them need enough other cards that fit the strategy to make it work. Like, if you want to stick a Stoneforge and run away with the game with, like, a Cauldron Complete, you're going to need ways to rip apart their hand even more. You're going to need ways to protect it potentially with, like, counter spells maybe, with, like in a Jeskai strategy or something like that. So, I don't know. It's not my favorite.
Wow.
That was a lot.
Sean D, we love you, but we just didn't love the decks we played today.
Oh yeah, so yeah, I went.
Not that he asked us to pick these specific decks,
That's
but
true. Yeah,
I went 1-4, 1-3 drop. Those were my 2 leagues. I had more fun in the tournament practice room where I did play against legitimate decks, but after that, all downhill.
Oof. So I'm the winner this week, huh?
You are.
Great.
So y'all, how are you feeling about Stoneforge right now?
seems good in Hammer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just an equipment tutor there, right?
Yeah. I wonder if you're committed to playing Stoneforge, should you just play Hammer? Because that's like the most successful Stoneforge deck we have right now, where it actually adds to that deck in a consistent way that can very frequently lead to you winning like the turn after you cast her.
But you're not playing a Stoneforge deck there. You're playing like a redundant equipment tutor effect.
But but in all of the decks that we played and talked about, you could win never having seen Stoneforge. Like we have all these other packages around it, and she's like this alternative plan. But what is it? What's the difference between a Stoneblade deck and a deck that just has a Stoneforge package in it, but also gets to do other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of gets back to the idea that we've talked about, like the Jeskai deck, where it's like, hey, I've got Ragavan. I've got other must-kill threats, and Stoneforge is just another one of them.
Dave, what do you think? You seem perturbed by my hypothetical question.
No, I think it's fine. I mean, I like the deck that... I think it was an interesting question that you had that's like, what's the difference between these things? I think we kind of talked about it earlier, which is like, there used to be one way to play Stoneforge, kind of, and now there just isn't anymore because there's more targets, there's more places that the card can show up, and so we're getting this different kind of vibe with it, but also at the same time, the card's not as powerful as it used to be. And so I think it's still a really good card in Modern, and a really good card to have around for people who like certain strategies like this, but I don't think it's going to be dominant anytime soon. I don't think it's going to be the best card in the decks that it's even good in anymore. I think it's going to be just like a good role player. And so most of these decks maybe shouldn't be called Stoneforge decks anymore. They're going to be called other things that happen to have that card in it. And I think that's okay. That's kind of a good journey. It's almost a good redemption journey for a card that was banned for being too powerful at one point in time or having too many bad memories associated with it, having it come back and be kind of like its own thing for a little bit and now just a player in the format.
Just a thing. Are you surprised that we ended up there? I'm surprised, right? It's like I thought it would be, like you said earlier, either really good or do nothing. And it somehow found itself into like the tier 2, tier 3 level of modern creatures, or it's just around.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that we got here. And I think that there's a few cards on the modern ban list that are still this same way, where most of what modern was at the time that they were banned, or the standard was at the time that these cards are. I don't think there's any standard reverberation cards left on the modern ban list anymore. But that memory is of a format that was about something else. And modern just isn't really about the things that made, for example, made Stoneforge scary, at a certain point in time to have off the ban list, because it's not really close to what that standard format was anymore at all. It's just not. And that's okay. Modern's about a different thing. But I do think it's fun that it means that Stoneforge gets to be a fine card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, sorry we didn't break anything open. We didn't explore a huge variety of Stoneforge decks, but I think what I was more interested in is actually getting at what's the reality of Stoneforge right now, and how can a card go from semi-broken to semi-useless. I mean, those are exaggerations on both ends, I think.
Because I think we would agree it's not useless.
No, not at all.
Right? It's like it's a reliable role player.
It tutors up a hammer.
It does something very strong in a lot of different decks, and it can do different strong things in different decks. Right? Not all Stoneforge decks are hammer decks or living weapon decks or Nettlecyst piles.
Right.
So maybe it's just a matter of finding the exact right non-hammer package for her right now, or maybe it's just accepting that like hammer is the best thing you can do with Stoneforge right now. And maybe as other equipment gets printed, or maybe other control spells gets printed, she can be a more consistent control deck again. But like control is still good right now. They're just not Stoneforge decks really, and maybe that's because control decks have better threats that they can play at the moment that line up more favorably within the metagame.
Yeah, like Crashing Footfalls.
Yeah, or Murktide Regent.
Murktide Regent, really. But yeah.
All right, well, that does wrap up this week's show. Thank you again, Sean D., for recommending this super fun topic. We love this card. Between the three of us, do we own 12 Stoneforges?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The Gentleman's Playsets?
Yeah, it might be one of the only cards that we all own playsets of. Probably not true, but...
Monkeys, lightning bolts.
Yeah, there's lots.
We should... Maybe we can do an episode one day
Blood Crypts.
where we're just comparing our collections.
That sounds like a fun one.
It's just the sound of like people flipping binders and re-sleeving cards. If you want to hear that episode where we're just sleeving cards and flipping binders, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. Basically every Wednesday now. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question, you can reach us at The Dive Down, all one word, on Twitter, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. We are now on Discord, and it is awesome. We sometimes stream ourselves playing Magic. Our other patrons stream themselves playing Magic, or even other video games. And it's made the community a whole lot better, I think. So,
yeah.
Way to go, fam. We on Discord now.
Exactly. And don't forget, no regular episode next week. Dave's not going to be on the week after that. Stan's taking a break for a little bit, but we'll be back. Things are going to be weird for the next couple of months for us, but we will be here to give you our lukewarm takes.
And adequate playing
stories, and, to help you go to sleep at night with our sonorous voices.
That's true. I've never been more grateful that I can play Magic on my phone. Like, having Arena Mobile is going to be really great, so that I can just like sneak in some games here and there between giving milk to a baby,
Yeah.
or like take extra long bathroom breaks.
Those start early, I'll tell you. Yeah. My kids
Extra long
are
bathroom
6 and 3 now, and I'm always hiding out in the bathroom trying to keep them away from me.
I'm reading the paper.
Leave Dad alone. He's just staring into space.
All right, shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring our shenanigans. You can support the Dive Down while playing Magic Online by signing up for a Mana Traders account using promo code The Dive Down 2021, all one word, though 2021 is numerical. Get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards with that code. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and yield your blades!
Somebody once told me
the
Stan was gonna roll me.
That was a song. 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 That was a song.